Well, welcome everybody to Montessori Lives, and I'm very excited to have with us this evening Rachel Cavanagh, who is an educator and educational therapist extraordinaire. And Rachel, maybe you can start by telling us your story, like what you do exactly and how you got there. It's quite an interesting one.
Mm. Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and be partnering with Montessori, so thank you very much. I started off as a high school teacher in the mainstream, and I did that for 20 years. And I had children of my own. I have three sons, two are neurodiverse, and I realized by the time they were in grade three, they couldn't read and they didn't have any maths and numeracy skills. And I had to own that the system that I worked in, there were problems there and there were things that weren't working. So I contacted their speech pathologist and OTs and said, what do I do? What do I do? How do I get these children reading and etc. And they said, have you thought about using an educational therapist? And I said, what's that? And that's where that love for learning to teach this way has grown.
Mm. So what is it that you do now as an educational therapist, and what have you found out about your son's journey that helped you in your journey as an educational therapist?
So, an educational therapist is someone who works holistically with the learner, observing and looking first. The first step is to see what can the learner do. That's the most important thing, and then observing and working, and also making sure you're understanding where that learner is with brainstem and their experience. Because a lot of them are coming to you traumatized with a traumatized brain, and they're in their deep part of their brain, and they're showing signs of trauma. So then what you do is you work through those things through a multisensory approach, and also using play. So there's a lot of play and there's a lot of big cushions and vibrating things that the kids can then utilize themselves and then take learning on themselves. I experimented on my children to begin with. So they were my first guinea pigs, and I experimented and I learnt this model, and I've written my own synthetic phonics approach. I worked with Professor Atwood. I worked with speech pathologists. I worked with OTs and other psychologists to write um, programs for children with neurodiversity so that they could learn the way their brain wanted to learn.
And tell us more about your connection with Montessori. How did you come across Montessori, and what attracts you to Montessori?
Throughout my career as an educational therapist, that's been 15 years on the back of 20 years of um, mainstream teaching. Um, some of my clients were Montessorians, and I was like, there's no trauma here. Um, this is really beautiful. I'm just working on the synthetic phonics. I'm just working on a few little touches here and there. And these young people, there's no trauma and they have no fear around learning. And so I was curious, how did they get to this point in their education journey? And they struggle with learning and they found learning difficult and their brains learn differently, but they weren't traumatized and they were open to learning and they were critical thinkers. And I was interested in that. And then one of my clients said, oh, I'd like to connect you with Montessori. And so um, that's where the journey began, and talking and learning myself more about Montessori and just being blown away and just being in awe of the Montessori approach. I really like it. I think it's amazing.
So were you saying that in your other clients, your non-Montessori clients, that the trauma resulted from the traditional education system?
Yes. Yep.
How does that
It's
work?
not, so it's not the traditional word trauma, like they've come from a war zone sort of trauma. I'm talking trauma, the fear response. So their brain is not in that free flow learning space. The kids begin with that anxiety, oh, I can't do this, or it's not happening, or I didn't do this right, or I can't, and it's not. And then they move from that anxiety state into a brainstem state where they're in that deep, uh, I can't think of the words. I've lost the word. The deep part of the amygdala, not yeah, the amygdala part of the brain, and
Mhm.
it's deep low in the brain there, and then they can't learn when they're there. It's I've heard it said before. It's like if you get a beautiful clean glass of water, and if you drop one drop of black ink into that, it's no longer clear and clean. It's like that with the learning. Like when the brain's traumatized and the brain's stressed out, or the learner is having thoughts of not being able to do this and they can't do it and they can't measure up, and here comes the next assessment and here I go. The child can become very have that traumatized brain, and not be able to learn and not go into that learning flow.
Mm. So can you say more about what it is about the traditional model that produces that response? You just mentioned assessment. Is it continual assessment or is it more than
But
that?
it's the it's I remember, I can give you the example of when in the 1990s when I first started teaching. I had the freedom to write my own criteria. I had the freedom to write my own assessments. And I would talk to the students. I'd say, what do you want to learn? What are we doing? I said, I'm going to do a colograph unit with you. How do you want to learn that? And then they would talk about how they wanted to learn it, and they wanted to do watercolor painting with it, whatever. And then I would go away and I'd write the assessment to suit what the students wanted. And then I would come back to them and we would work through it together. Then I would we would get to the point where we'd finish that and they'd go, oh, can we spend 2 more weeks on this? We really enjoyed experimenting with this part and we really enjoyed this. And there would just be this beautiful learning experience, like a flow in the classroom. Um, that left with the creation of the national curriculum. It became a cycle of 5 or 4 week continual rotations. Download information, kids are meant to pick it up, and then they're meant to be assessed after that. And there's burnout and fatigue from assessment, and there's also the continual having to download it. There's not that critical thinking, higher order thinking, experimentation, exploration, all of that. It's become very dry, if I can put it that way. Here's the information, download it, show it to us in this assessment piece, directly how we want it shown.
Mm.
And
So you've done,
it's prescriptive, I'd like to call it
yeah,
prescriptive.
yeah. You've done a lot of research into Montessori. You recently went on a trip on a world trip where
Mm.
you went to visited a lot of Montessori schools around the world. Can you talk about that? And what did you
Yes.
find?
Last year I visited schools in Thailand and Denmark and Norway. Each school was different. Each school had to deal with the local government and local schooling and local situation. They all had those local challenges, which made, like, for instance, in Denmark, the kids learn English first, which I didn't know. They learn English first before they learn Danish. And so the kids were struggling to pick up their own culture and struggling to pick up their own um, language, their native language.
Mm,
Um, and so that was a challenge that the Montessori school in Denmark, the international school there, was facing. Another one is funding and money. That's also very difficult to be able to resource and to resource authentically the school. Another big challenge I was noticing in the schools was their neurodiverse students,
mm,
and what to do with and how to manage and teach these sorts of learners.
mm,
And each school found that that was one of their biggest challenges. In Norway, There's not an NDIS system like we have here in Australia. They have a system where the school is given a parcel of money, and they weren't sure what to do with that parcel of money, or how to manage staff with that money. And they were at the beginning stages of understanding what to do with a neurodiverse child that has sensory needs. Yeah, and how to integrate them with the other students, and how to make it natural, if that makes sense. How to make that experience natural for both the other students and the student with sensory needs.
Mhm.
In Thailand, they've just in Chiang Mai, they have just built the most beautiful school there. It's in the Liana style, with the beautiful big steep roofs, um,
Mhm.
to deal with all the rainy conditions and monsoon weather. And they've just designed it in a Montessori style. And it's opened just recently, and it's an amazing school. I enjoyed spending the day there.
What did you discover about Montessori on this trip? What were some of the commonalities that impressed you between the schools in these different countries?
I think the common thing is the thread with Montessori, using the 3 years, the 3 year groupings, and also using the observation staff being. I like the way that staff were so relaxed, because they spent so much time in observation, not in hurry, hurry, let's get this done. Here, go here, you move there, you get there, let's do this. The staff were relaxed because the children took responsibility, as you know, with the Montessori model, of the learning is their business,
Mm.
and the organization of materials is their business, the cleanup if there's an accident or if something happens, or they helped each other. So there was that 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 it wasn't that top down approach. It was like this, that everyone's in charge approach, and everyone keeps the room and the class rolling. And it was just this, in each room there, in each classroom, there was a different culture, but the same sort of feel to it, because of that Montessori approach. I hope that made sort of made sense. Like that, there was that same energy or movement in the classroom,
Mm.
and it was always working. It looked like it was at times it looked like organized chaos. I'm just going to open the door for my son. And at times it looked like organized chaos, but it was just symbiotic and all just working together at the same time.
Mm. So how many years have you been an educational therapist now?
It's coming close to 15.
Wow.
So
And
I've been doing it part-time. So when I was transitioning from the mainstream and building a client base, I was doing it 2 days a week. Then I moved up to three, and then I got, by just before COVID, I had a waiting list. And then COVID, I was able to pick up some teachers who wanted to leave the mainstream, who were dissatisfied with the mainstream and wanted to work in this style. And so I've got 4 teachers now that work with me around Brisbane.
so what is that style? Can you describe what you do with the students to help them?
It's an intervention, is the best way to put it. It's a sensory integration as an intervention. I care less about if they can read or write. I work more the bottom level, the thing that has to happen at the bottom. They have to have auditory and visual integration. So it's not just, what the eyes and the ears, the hardware is doing, it's what the software in the brain is doing. And this is what the OTs and speechies taught me. There's the key, I think the big key we're missing in a lot of the work we do with students is not integrating the sensory systems. And then looking at the fact that a large group of our students now and the kids we work with are neurodiverse. We're not integrating those senses that way, and we're also not working on teaching regulation and teaching young people how to recognize their own emotions, and then also the fact that your thoughts and your body and your emotions are all connected together, and then how do you then connect those? How do you then get your sensory system and get the sensory diet all balanced then for learning to happen? Learning's on the top here. Learning's tier 3. It's these other 2 tiers that we need to work on as well. And I find that if I can work on some kids I've taught to read, actually a large number of kids I've taught to read, and I haven't even used my synthetic phonics approach. I haven't needed. All I've done is done the sensory integration stuff, and that's it. What was needed.
Mm. You probably know that a lot of Montessori's work is education of the senses in early childhood. So she saw that as really important in laying the foundation for children's ability to learn. What do you think it is that prevents that from happening in many children that you're seeing?
I think it's
What's
the wiring. I think it's to do with the wiring of the brain now. There's quite a different wiring of the brain in the next generation and the couple of generations that have passed. I don't think traditional style of learning works anymore. I think we need to set this underlying foundation first before we can presume that learning is happening. Yeah, there's been just a very big shift in the neurology and the wiring that's happening in brains now. Uh,
what's
like
changed?
I believe that it's to do with epigenetics and genetics, and also to do with technology. The use of technology, in particular scrolling, um, there's evidence out there everywhere from all sorts of universities around the world to show that um, these 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 things have actually rewired people's brains. And then once the brain is rewired, the wiring has changed, then that person then goes on and has children, then they pass that wiring on through genetics. But I do believe that the brain is plastic, and the rewiring isn't that difficult, and it can happen in very small doses over days. And that's what I do in my work. I've experimented, and I've written and put together programs, and put together small activities that can be used, and they're very much they can be directed by and worked by with the teacher, or they can be self-directed, or students can work on these things together in groups.
You mentioned epigenetics. Can you talk more about what that is and how that plays a part?
Epigenetics is all the different places where, well, this is my little understanding of it. So it's all the different places where uh, this wiring change has come from. So it's come from, the new car smell. And you go and you sit in the car and you can smell, you're actually taking in plastic and that's through the nose, and it's going straight and can be lodged straight into your brain. There's also genetic changes. There's also all of controversial ones um, um, that I won't mention. But if you want to have a read more about the change in the neuro tribes, there's a book by Steve Silberman called Neuro Tribes. It's a brilliant read. It's a big book, but I do believe it's on audiobooks, and it is really good. It goes through and explains all the different people over time that have contributed to the understanding of how we've got to the place we are now with the genetics and the brains. Professor Tony Atwood, he's one of the world leading specialists with autism. He said that is this the evolution of the human brain? Is autism where the human brain is going? And the change in the human brain. I have an old friend who is a speech pathologist. She started her practice 30 years ago. She said that when she first started her practice in her first 2 years of study, out from study, she said you'd have to go across about 3 different schools to try and find 1 or 2 children with global language delay. Now you find probably 3 or so children or more with global language delay in every class in the mainstream school. That doesn't include the kids that have dyslexia, hyperlexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and all of the diagnosis and the brain patterning with ADHD and ADD. And my question also as I bring that up is how much of ADD and ADHD is actually brain shutdown and people going into brainstem? And how much of that diagnosis, how many kids are being drugged because they're traumatized actually? And I know I'm sounding very controversial, but I'm very concerned with the number of children that are getting these quick fix diagnoses and then being handed drugs and then ending up without a proper solution. It's very worrying. It's very worrisome, the fact that we have and will have a generation of functionally illiterate people. And
You've mentioned brainstem a couple of times. Can you, for those who are not familiar with what that term means and the profile of a child who's in brainstem, what does that mean exactly?
So brainstem is, for me, it's the amygdala, that middle, it's the middle lower part of the brain, just above the brainstem. And then the amygdala is where the flight, fright, or freeze mode happens. And it can be triggered by anxiety, stress, sensory overload for people with autism, exhaustion, trauma, other past traumas can trigger. And it means that the person, the learner, is not functioning in their frontal lobe where they can make decisions, plan, shift, use their working memory, process, and do all of those decision-making things in the front part of their brain. And by the way, ADHD and autism are conditions of the frontal lobe. So they are difficulties using and activating the frontal lobe. But it doesn't mean those parts of the brain can't be built and wired.
Do you think that a lot of the issues that we're seeing with children and learning and neurodiversity and issues with children in the classroom are due to a general rise in anxiety among children, and part of that is due to uses of digital devices? And are there other causes for that general?
I really think it's down to attention spans being the size of a flea, or the attention spans are so small that they loop. I've seen these kids looping, like that, and they don't process and spend a long time problem solving and going through a task. That is one thing I really do like about Montessori is, and the approach with Montessori is that you see the task through and you problem solve it and you take it through to its end, and you have to give it attention, and you have to um, go through all the emotions and processes and problem solving techniques and higher order thinking to get to the end of a task. Very rarely do kids do that anymore in this worksheet life that they live in.
Mm.
It's one worksheet that's ripped down off the not one school. They take it straight down off the curriculum website, and they go from worksheet to worksheet to worksheet. It's learnt helplessness. That's the opposite to problem solving,
Mhm.
and we're not creating free thinkers and people that can uh, design their own way out of a situation. They think quickly about it. It's a 5 second think, or however long they can, that it's their brains are like mirroring the scrolling and the flicking. 5 second video, next, 5 second video, next.
Mm.
And it's like their whole life is a YouTube short or a TikTok short video. And there's not that time, and their brains are being trained to do short spurts of things.
Mm. So how does your approach to sensory integration help counter these issues that you're seeing in children who come to you?
Well, the first thing I have to do is work through that trauma. What I also do is make them push through and work through and talk me through as they're going through that moment in that uncomfortable part in their brain. And they'll go, I don't know. And I'll go, but what don't you know? And we'll start talking through what's actually happening in their brain. And I get them to start pushing through. And I say to them, it's like when you're a muscle man and you're doing your workout at the gym. Do you just go until it starts to feel a bit sore and you go, oh, that'll do me. It's starting to hurt. Oh, I'm going to give up there. That's enough for me. With these kids that have got um, this inability to concentrate or process auditory or visual information for long, you've got to help them understand how to rebuild it. And so what I'll do is I'll say, well, okay, it's you're gonna have brain hurt for a bit. You're gonna have to build that brain muscle again. And you're gonna have to be like that muscle man who's at the gym. You're gonna have to push through this, and I'll let them know. I can tell when they're getting to that point where they're getting full and their processing ability's full. I'll say, look, I can see you full. I can see it. It's okay. It's okay to be at that point. Can we get that big muscle, can we get it working? And then I'll do it, and I'm only going to give you five more, just five more goes. Let's have five more goes at it, and then
Mm.
I'll stretch it out. And then each week I'll stretch it out a bit more until they can process a lot. And plus, another thing I do is get them going left brain, left brain, right brain as well, and switching between and poking holes in the cortex between their brain.
How do you do that? How do you get them to go from left brain to right brain and back?
I use this is where I love using multidisciplinary. We're not in silos, we work together. So I've got a program that I have from an OT, and what we do is we work a color, then we do a shape or a number, then we'll do color, because color's right brain, and naming a shape or and we have fun with it. And we go back and forth. It ends up in a laugh, and we have a really good time. Or they want to be timed to see how fast they can do it and meet their own personal best. And then they'll get their whole family involved in it. And then they'll bring back the timesheets and go, look, 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 look what this family did. Look what this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You mentioned synthetic phonics and you have an approach to teaching reading. Can you
Mhm.
talk about how does that work?
I have a synthetic phonics approach that I wrote in. I've used an old synthetic phonics approach for about 7 or 8 years. Then I wrote my own. The reason I did that, I wanted to make it suit the neurodiverse brain. I wanted to unpack the um, code or the letters in a way that, and I experimented for a while, and I released the code in levels. I have 4 levels. I've got a blue code, which has 10 letters. Then I have an orange code that's 22, and then a green code that's 22, um, and then a pink code that's 33 of the characters or letters. Um, so I have 46 sounds within that. I chose 46 and I left out like zh, because I thought it would be too confusing. And
Mm.
people, my young ones with visual processing, that would be difficult because then they'd mix that up with g and j. So I just went with the 46 and I unpacked it. And what I do is I get them reading, spelling, writing, and confident and feeling great about themselves in the blue code. Then we move, then they're itching and raring and they can't wait. Then they start teaching themselves, and
Mm.
then they start unpacking it themselves and jumping into the orange code, and then the green, and then they'll come back to me and say, oh, I saw this sign on the side of the road and it had that code in it. I'm doing that code now.
Mm.
And it's
What are
so
the
nice.
differences what's the difference between those colors, the different levels? Like,
I chose them because they were bright colors. They couldn't be mixed up when they were side by side, but there's some synergy between the orange and the pink and the green and the blue.
mm,
I wanted them to look really different and stand out so that they didn't blend. It was, this
mm,
code's different to this code, and you've made it. You have conquered that code. Your confidence is there. Be strong. You can read all of that. You can spell all of
mm.
that. You've done it. Good for you.
But what's the characteristic of the letters that all make up the blue code, for example?
They are all the blue code. I chose it because it's only one digraph.
Mm,
Um, and I chose them. It's all the vowels, so it's a, e, I, o, a, and then it's just five of, and I chose 10 to go into that first code because you can make lots of words and you can make sentences. A lot of them just choose 6. You can't make as many words and as many sentences, and you can't get people them reading within 3 sessions. I generally get, well, I've got a little prep girl I've been seeing just this year. I had a reading within 3 sessions.
mm,
And then she's reading all of these sentences then that are part of Blue Code because I've got 10 letters, 10 digraphs that I can use, and I can write whole sentences. And then I
mm,
have her reading nonsense sentences, so there's no
mm,
guessing.
mm, mm,
So I don't let the guessing come in. I don't let any of, because at school, a lot of schools are still using the pattern and using this thing where you can look at the picture and then look at the first letter and then guess.
mm,
No, no.
mm,
So I prefer to skill them. I skill my students and then they can go in and they don't need me anymore. My aim is to put myself out of a job.
mm,
What I do is I scaffold and work heavily and support the emotions and get them out of that brainstem and into that frontal lobe, get the prefrontal cortex working, and then I just let myself go so
mhm,
that then they don't need me anymore. And that's why I call it an intervention, because I
mm,
have to undo the damage. So I roll slightly differently to Montessori in that way. I'm unpacking, and that's why when I got my first Montessorian, I was like, oh wow, half my job doesn't need doing,
mm,
because there wasn't the damage. There wasn't, because the Montessori model works. They are self-based learners,
mm,
inquisitive.
Why do you think you were getting students then who had been in Montessori?
They were neurodiverse
Mhm.
and they needed a, a little bit more of a targeted approach with the sensory, and then building a little bit. I didn't really have to build much of the synthetic phonics and phonemic awareness over the top. It was really the integration of the sensory systems that needed, and the processing speed and word retrieval.
Mhm.
It wasn't anything to do with um, trauma and brainstem, and it really wasn't anything to do with the synthetic phonics. But again, I had to bring it back in over the top once I'd done the sensory integration work and the regulation work as well.
Why is it called synthetic phonics?
I do know that. It's not synthetic as in it's plastic or it's made of something. I think it's the way that the system knits together. And then phonics meaning um, letter and sound combination. And then you also have phonological awareness that sits above the phonemic awareness.
Mhm.
So phonemic awareness is your ability to use and manipulate sounds. And then
Mhm.
there's phonological awareness, which is your ability to quickly understand the mouth shape and the shape or the sound or the throat or the jaw and all of this stuff, how that works with the letter or the picture that you're looking at.
Where does comprehension fit with this? Do you also work with students on
Yeah. Yeah,
comprehension?
I've written a little program that is actually student directed. I've written a little program for comprehension, and I've experimented with thousands of students to write this. I won't name the high school, but a high school was wanting to lift their comprehension. So I went in and worked for that school for a little while before I'd had enough of mainstream schools. I went in and out of three classes of grade sevens, that's 90, that was about 90 of them. Um, I think 28 of them had a reading age of 6.5.
Mm,
And then their comprehension was even lower than that. Their comprehension, I couldn't even get it. Like I couldn't even uh, test it because they couldn't read properly.
mm,
And I was able to lift their comprehension age at least 4 years in a semester.
mm,
Um, and that was by getting them to use the text differently. So you don't use the text in the same way when you do comprehension. Comprehension is about the question, it's all about the question. And I tell them that a question is a job, and you need to make sure that you pull that job apart in a particular way, and that you're looking for clues and you're using evidence. And they'll go, oh, that means I'm copying and cheating. I'll go, no,
mhm,
questions are about evidence. It's not about you being a copier or a cheater.
mhm,
And working through that process and disarming that. And then, yeah, so we look at the questions differently, and then we write an answer differently. And so I've put together a formula. And then once kids get the idea of this formula, then they can take that formula to any question they want and become self. It's like a little maths problem. You know what I mean?
mm,
A plus E equals Q. And then I get them to put this formula together and figure the formula out. And then that's where their self-confidence then shoots up, and they don't need me anymore.
mm.
So I guess
Do you think?
it's about lots of little moments of explicit teaching
Yeah,
and then pulling back.
yeah. Do you think Montessori has a role to play in reforming the education system? Where do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would love to see Montessori become a leader in this space. Montessori has got the Willy Wonka golden ticket. Montessori has what it takes to to lead education into the future. Um, but there's a few problems there, not within Montessori, but to do with the system and the mainstream and the space that education sits in.
Mm,
Montessori has a tried, true, tested, and working um, way of teaching.
mm,
Um, so in marketing they call that a blue ocean approach. Um, but what's happening is Montessori is seen as a disruptor to the system because you have this big mechanistic system, which parents are beginning to see doesn't work. I really do feel like we're on the edge of something, like we're on the edge of an evolution or a revolution in this. Um, and if Montessori positions itself well and finds a way to disarm these parents, and I was thinking about it, the parents have fears,
mm,
and their fears are real,
mm,
like mine. My child was going to finish school illiterate unless I didn't take strong action. And not every parent has my skills or could go away and learn the things I learnt. So parents have real fears. Parents are skeptics because of this,
mm.
and parents are hard to disarm as a result.
So by disarm parents, you mean Montessori needs to find a way to uh, assuage the fears of parents about.
Yes, yeah, and show parents that there's another way. Show parents that the model that their child is in is not actually working. It's broken.
Mm,
It's not. If we have a generation of functionally illiterate, we have all of these kids with uh, trauma. Why am I in a job? I
mm,
wouldn't have this job if the system was working right.
mm. What do you think Montessorians need to do to get that message out there more to parents?
This is where I'm up to because my business creates skills for life, and what I do, I'm in the same boat, and I'm trying to figure that out at the moment. When you disarm, like we're like in the medical world, um, we're like the naturopath to the doctor. That's where that's where I sit too.
Mm,
And that's why I enjoy being in the Montessori community. I like being part of what you do because I don't feel alone then.
mm,
Um, and we're all working, I think we can all work together and we're all trying to figure out how do we disarm parents? What there's got to be some particular way of wording and showing parents that this is the authentic way to learn and to the safe place to send your child for to be a learner.
mm. Yeah, well, Montessorians have been at it for a while now. We've had them,
Mhm.
we've had this model out there and proving itself for well over 100 years, and it still, doesn't seem to have taken hold in most places around the world. And there are some places where it has. Thailand, you mentioned, um, and it's much bigger, of course, in the United States and the Netherlands and some other pockets around the world. But in Australia and most other places in the world, the model doesn't seem to be resonating with parents.
Mm,
So I guess there's something that we're not doing to get the message out there to parents. Is it
yeah. Um,
maybe
I,
it's that we're waiting for parents to find us rather than going out and
mm,
helping parents understand?
Yeah, and helping to parents to understand the difference and showing parents the difference. I don't think there's very many parents that would understand the 3-year groupings, that would understand the concept of how teachers work, that they work as observers and not, they don't saw heads open and shove information in there.
Yeah.
I don't think they understand I think that they'd be very surprised to understand all of the self-help and the skills that are developed early on, that if a child can do that themselves, then it shouldn't be done by an adult. And the problem solving and the higher order thinking and all of those things, I'm not sure all parents understand and know this.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and same with me. How many people know what an educational therapist is? But in America, they're commonplace. They have an association there, and they're well known, and there's about 2 or 3 in every school.
Mm. How have you managed to stay sane in your journey in your journey? How do you
Oh.
manage the work-life balance?
Uh, I camp. I like to put a slide on the back of my truck and go and sit in the bush
Mm.
and read my own books or just have quiet time.
Where can I ask where are your boys now in their journey?
My eldest, he's turning 20 this year, and he is studying business and AI,
Mm.
and he's doing a double degree and working full time. He's just bought his first house, and he's just going at life 100 miles an hour. Nothing to slow him down. My middle son, who's going to be 18 in 6 months, when he was in pre-prep, they told me he would never go to a mainstream school. They told me he would never have a job and he wouldn't know how to make friends and do anything of the such.
Mm.
He's about to graduate high school. He's studying crime and justice. He's about to buy his first car. He's just been made permanent contract put onto a contract at Woolworths with his job.
Mm.
He's on a date tonight. I'm very proud of him. He's on a date tonight, um, with a girl from Woolies.
Mm.
Apparently, I'm not going to meet her because I'll embarrass him. And and then yeah, so he's graduate and he wants to get an apprenticeship, and yeah, and travel. And he's got lots of friends he visits on the weekend and during the week. He's one of the most popular boys in grade 12. Um, I know this because I get a phone call. He's socializing more than he should. Um, and then my youngest is in grade 9. He has his own mowing business. He mows all the neighbors' yards and he makes his little cash and away he goes. He he's working on a battery box with an inverter and building. He's got amazing projects. He's really creative with his projects. Um, he wants to be a diesel mechanic. So he's in year 9. We're going to get through to the end of year 9, and then we're going to start moving straight into alternate learning and alternate school. He, to his credit, he has dyslexia on the first percentile and dysgraphia on the third percentile. It's taken him 10 years of work, and I've used my synthetic phonics approach, and he's learnt how to read fluently. Um,
Mm.
and he will be able to then have his own independence.
Mm. What do you, from the work that you've done and what you've seen of Montessori, what do you think that Montessorians can do differently to improve what they do for neurodiverse learners?
I think the model is there. Montessori has the perfect model. The environment, all of it, is a really good, solid base. I would change it and change the way that the sensory is looked at slightly. I would be in the observations that teachers make. I would be looking at working with the sensory diet during the day and observing and working with that. I'd be looking at the 4 planes and looking more about the shift very individually, because people with autism have a developmental delay and a developmental difference. And I'd be not mapping it by chronological age, but developmentally,
Mm,
and just making a few tweaks like that, and it will rock. It'll just be next level.
mm,
And also looking at some of the things in the space, like such as you know how within Montessori there is the self-help and the cleaning skills and the cooking skills. Brilliant. These are things that people with autism desperately need to learn and to work on these skills. But within that, we need to be very careful of the smells and of the cleaning products, because they can create a sensory overload without knowing.
mm,
Also, some of the materials and equipment in the room can be soothing for sensory or overloading for sensory as well. So just a slightly different lens, like just putting on a pair of glasses, a little lens over the top,
mm.
is all. If that's all that's needed. It's such a brilliant. It's evolved in and it is such a brilliant model. But I do think it does need. Um, and can I say that that's what we're going to be doing and partnering to do?
Yes.
So
So you'll be speaking at our conference,
yes,
the
I,
spring
I
conference.
will be. I'm very excited. I'm really looking forward to the Gold Coast and Perth.
Mm,
Um,
in
the what
May.
in May, yeah. What I've talked about tonight is basically, I'll go into more detail and talk more about and give examples. And what I want to make this practical. I have sat through so many professional developments and workshops and this, and walked away and what was that? How am I going to use that in my practice? I will be giving takeaways and to use the next day. And I don't mean that in a in a fob it off sort of way. You will walk away and you will have things that you can do, sensory activities, sensory things that you can do, sensory um, processes you can use with learners to immediately change and rewire brains, and that next day. And I
So
want.
if I understand what you're saying correctly, is that one of the key advantages of Montessori education is the work with the senses, sensory integration and development of the senses that Montessori laid down.
Mm,
However, her approach to education of the senses was aimed at the way the child's brain a century ago, and that children's brains have changed in the last century, and because
mm,
of technology and nutrition and the greater general anxiety of life now, children need a different kind of sensory education, or
yeah.
slightly modified to what it is in Montessori. And so that's what you're going to be talking about,
Mm,
how
yep.
to how to um, alter Montessori sensory integration and sensory development to suit the modern brain of children.
Yes, exactly. And that's the experimentation and the work that I've been doing for the last 15 years. I've been, I've had thousands of students that I've worked with to be able to experiment and put this together and find what works, especially for the autistic and the neurodiverse brain. What is the sensory the sensory work rewiring that's needed, and how do we do it? What are those small micro activities that can be done to create that rewiring so that the learning flows and that they're not stuck and not able to process this information?
Well, I'm really looking
Can I
forward to
jump in
hear.
with one question, Mark?
Yes. Yeah.
So I've been so quiet all the way through.
You've done so
Yeah.
well.
So my question is, so my areas with adolescents, for instance, and I really take on board what you say about looking back at the planes in a different way and not and as a more individualized way. But would you say, even perhaps not so much at the Gold Coast conference, but over in Western Australia, would there be an opportunity to really look at some of that work that could be applicable to those children that you see later, because sometimes that trauma is even more deeply embedded.
Mm.
And I
Yes,
have
very much
particular
so.
children in
Yep.
mind, and I'm sure
Yep.
other teachers will as well.
With your teenagers, you do have to spend, like, when you get them, just say they haven't had that Montessori process, and they come to you, and they might be in a third plane, perhaps, but you can't start working with them. You can't start because they're stuck and frozen. They're
Yeah,
either frozen or they're in freeze mode, or
yeah,
they are in flight
absolutely.
mode. And yeah, it takes a lot to break down that. Yeah, I can spend ages.
Yeah,
It depends on the
yeah.
student. A long, long time. Um, uh, Developing that safety.
Mm. Before you could do anything else.
And what I do is use their sensory systems to bring them out of brainstem and to bring them out of that freeze flight mode. So you can use sensory stimulation to do that.
Without overload.
Yeah.
That's
So
your skill.
sensory stimulation doesn't mean when you stimulate the senses, that doesn't mean like you're giving them a vibrating pillow or you're making them roll around and you know what I mean, on a furry fluffy rug or something. Sensory stimulation can mean that you're getting them to use their auditory system, or you're getting them to use their visual system in a different way. Or that you've got, and another way that I stimulate the system, I've got a little one at the moment that I'm seeing that's 4. I've just started seeing her. The way I get her to start engaging her visual system, we go really quiet. I stop talking in a normal loud voice. The lights will go off. She wears a 4-brain. Have you ever seen a 4-brain?
No.
How can I show it? Can you, without it going blurry?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
There. So I also use a 4-brain. I'd love to see Montessori schools use 4-brains. They are cutting edge, next level ways of training the brain to use sound. So they go on the head, like on this part here, on the ear, on here.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They don't go in the ear, they go on the bone, and they are vibrators, and that's another way that I stimulate the senses.
Okay, could talk for hours, Mark.
Yeah. Been so interesting. I can't wait for you.
So you'd like to have, hang on, because I want to write that down. So in Perth, you'd like me to maybe talk about the trauma stuff more, about how to.
I think so, because increasingly over years, I mean, my experience is exactly the same as yours. It's your call, Mark, but and I think most teachers are saying the same thing.
Is that right?
Yeah, in that a long time ago, we had a very different classroom, and I think now our classrooms look very different, and we need to be equipped with other things, another toolkit to help us to manage the diversity of needs in that classroom for everyone. And I think the notion of experimentation is really useful, that you're talking about, that idea of observing for a really long time. That's the other thing I took away too, the fact that our teachers are often a lot more relaxed, and that's because the work's been done beforehand. That preparation, and you sit and you watch, you observe, and go from there. But then what to do with that observation?
Yes, what to do
And
with the
I think it'd be
traumatized brain.
something with that Perth we're advertising is the range in ages. So Gold Coast is early childhood, the focus, but then Perth is just trying to meet the needs of all ages, for the teachers that is. So they'll be coming from backgrounds, not just in early childhood, which is our biggest part of the sector, but primary and secondary's actually got a big showing in Perth. I don't know how many we'll get from there, but
Okay, so it's the teenagers, and
I don't
it's
know. It's up to you, Mark. That's just me being selfish.
No, I
well,
think you're
have
right.
a think about it and get back to me if you want to have a talk, and then because I can look at, because I just do all this stuff without even.
Yeah, you don't. You've done it. You've been doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have at least six at the moment that are violent.
yeah,
And that's not because they want to bash people up. It's because they're traumatized and
yeah, yeah. So they're responding, and
mm,
it's interesting. I work casually at the school that I worked at for 20 years, and I'm conscious of the time, Mark. I don't want to hold you up either.
That's fine.
But what I notice is, because I work casually, I'm often not there in the same classroom repeatedly. But what I do notice is that children who will start, say, in year seven, like there's a little boy who was in year seven, and I don't see him very often, but I saw him today, and he's year nine, and he's almost irrecognizable because there's a calm that's come over
mm,
him. The fight's still a little bit there, but it's at one point he struggled with something and would never have asked for my help. Now I offered because I could see him struggling, and he took it. And that you would never have seen that 3 years ago. And that's not because he knows me. That's because of the safety that he feels, and he's out of
mm.
that mode. Like, so I just think also that message to teachers that it does take a long time. And
It does.
I don't think his teachers necessarily see that change as dramatically as I do. That's been the beauty of being coming in and out, in that I see it, because it can sometimes it's 3 months, and I think, whoa, you're a different child.
Yeah.
And it's because that safety's there. And maybe a lot of those strategies that you've talked about, teachers are using, but without realizing, they just see them as part of their pedagogy. But then sometimes to have that heightened and highlighted for them
Mm,
makes them realize that it is. So, or that they might need to, like what you were saying about practical life, that doing for themselves. There's a little girl I was taught, well, she's in 9 now, and I still see her as quite lost, particularly academically. But when it comes to practical life things, I think that's our opportunity.
mm.
Case studies would be really useful, like if you've got examples of specific things, because they often really tweet, like it really strikes a chord with something. You go, oh, that's so and so, or that's, and you can, it helps you to seize on what you've said, so that it's a takeaway for us.
Mm.
Anyway, I
Yeah, I
probably
think,
should have jumped in earlier, but
yeah, I,
yeah.
Rachel, I think you've got a really important message for Montessori teachers, because I think a lot of Montessorians don't want to say it, but they're thinking something's not working. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing from my training, but it's not working. And I think the issue is that in many cases that the children are, like you said, they're in trauma, they're in their brainstem. And
Mm.
it's because of the increase in general anxiety in society in general, but also the use of technology and other things that are putting children in that traumatized state, mild traumatized state.
Mm.
And when they're in that state, it's hard for them to be able to relax enough to be able to use the Montessori system well, to be able
It's
to.
and teaching them to regulate, but it's also I could tell you the case study of one guy that he went everywhere. He's at Autism Queensland. He's been mainstream. I've got a few of them I could and I taught him to read because I found the way that I brought it to him to his logic, if that makes sense.
Mm.
And he still struggles with the trauma and everything, and we have overturned desks and we have all
Mm.
sorts of things, and mum gets punched, and but
Mm.
we but yeah, it's
Mm.
I'd have to yeah, it's I'd have to look at what I've done with him, and because I just get it to evolve. It just everyone always says
Yeah,
their kids that are too violent, that are too this, that are too that, and I go, oh yeah, bring them, it's fine.
yeah. And you almost do it intuitively now, I imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd have to
And
think
to
about
give you,
what I do.
it's really is a big issue in our system because, well, I think it's everywhere, but I think we often get those kids who are last resort kids where parents are going, I just don't know what
Yeah.
to do with them anymore. I had a classroom of 25 for a month last year.
Mm.
18 of them had documented um, learning needs.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the majority of the rest of them did too. So you
Yeah.
are sort of functioning in this. So, to have had this toolkit, I went back to years of experience and working closely with the assistant and making them feel safe and doing all that. And we had a great time, but
Mm.
there's still a lot of things that are hit and miss.
Yep.
And that's why I think it would be great to hear what you've got, what you've done, and
Yeah, and I
yeah,
think I think the
and you do
biggest
know
thing.
us well, like
Mm.
you know what we do pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been really studying it and looking into it with Mark's help, and yeah, I'm putting together those workshops as well. That I'm writing. Um,
Mhm.
Right.
yeah, and as I do those, I'm really thinking about what you do. But this gives me more information. And Gold Coast, there was one other thing, Mark, that you said something you said to do at the Gold Coast. I can't think what it was. It was definitely was it to do with the trauma? No, the brain? No.
I can't remember.
Oh, I want to remember. So the trauma in the brain and that stuff was with Perth, but with Gold Coast, you said just before, it's about a bit before, about 5 to 7, you said it. Um,
I'll remember at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
mm, but it was
Uh,
good because it's what I had to talk about. Like it was like, okay, because the sensory,
yeah,
that was
that's
it.
a great
So it's
idea.
so
Yeah.
you, but it's not just sensory. You wanted me to talk about because Montessori does sensory.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
was
but the way you look at that is different because it means that's such a strong word to Montessorians,
mm,
the sensorial equipment,
yeah,
yeah, but I think looking at how you approach that too.
yeah, and it's a different approach.
Yeah, that you explained too, that it's about modifying that development of the senses a bit more.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you're where you'll hit the money is talking to Montessorians about how the brain has changed, which has made it more difficult for the average learner to be able to use the Montessori approach successfully. And the reason for that is because of what you were talking about, general anxiety and mild trauma sending children into brainstem. And so how you use sensory integration to calm them, to calm the brain and to bring them into the prefrontal cortex. And that makes it more, it makes it easier for them to be able to use the Montessori equipment. I think, yeah, that's going to be really helpful for Montessorians, because I think there's a lot of frustration among Montessorians who think, it's just not working. Why isn't it working anymore? And it's to do with that trauma response.
It is. It's a major part of it. It's the layers of it. It's that bottom stuff. You got to deal with that before you can get up there to that learning stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's where everyone is going. I think that's where every single party is going wrong. And I think that what works is to get the kids in. It looks like you're doing nothing. When you start, it looks like you're a fat waste of space. Why do they bother coming to you? Because you don't speak. You sit. You might do something gentle and sensory together. You might
but
play
it's
a
building
game.
the trust.
Yep. So, and it's about that trust
and understanding, like building an understanding. It's really observing.
It's that observing thing.
Yeah.
And giving that processing speed as processing time as well. Because when they're in brainstem, the processing all slows down, everything slows down, speech slows down. Yep.
Well, I think we just hit our stride in the last part of the interview. It took me a while to get there.
No, you both did really well.
You reckon?
I was jotting down, and I probably got lots more questions, but it's best to not overload it.
Well, I think we could talk for another 5 hours, and it's really starting to get into it. But I think I'm primed now for your presentations in May. But I think we should do this again. And thank you again for your time. It's been always fascinating talking with you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. I had a nice time. You guys are kindred spirits, and it's always good to talk my topic. And it's hard to find people that get the depth of what this is all about and understand. You've got to be, I think you've got to be a Montessorian. You've got to be one in the community to understand it.
I'm going to stop the recording